Okay, so our next speaker is Terika Harris. So Dr. Terika Harris, are you there, Terika?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I'm trying to share my screen.
No, it's okay. It's just nice to have you on screen while I introduce you. So Dr. Terika Harris is in the Department of Mathematics Education at Teachers College, Columbia University. She received a BS and MS in mathematics from Jacksonville University and the Georgia Institute of Technology, respectively. Her thesis is Dudley Weldon Woodward Dudley Weldon Woodard and the graduate program in mathematics at Howard University. So I believe you've recently obtained your PhD, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, when did you receive your, was it,
In the spring of 2025.
okay, so
So this spring.
newly minted PhD. So Terika, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm really excited to be here. I love talking about Woodard and the work that he's done within math and math education and at HBCUs. So I just really appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk about him. And just to start, I'll give a little more background on who I am to add to the wonderful introduction that was just done. But I'm from Annapolis, Maryland, which is a small town in Maryland. It's where the Naval Academy is, if anyone's familiar with the area. But I also am a first generation college student, and now as of last spring, the first PhD in my family. And my undergrad and master's were in math. And then after my experience in that master's program, I decided I wanted to focus more on education. Um, so I was looking at math education programs. And in that process, I discovered this book by math mathematics education researcher Erica Walker, called Beyond Banneker, where she told the story of so many Black mathematicians who I had never heard of. And it was in this book that I first learned about Albert Cox, who we're celebrating here today, and Dudley Weldon Woodard. And so after discovering that, I knew I wanted to work with her. So I applied to Teachers College, which is Columbia University's graduate education school. Um, and she was Dr. Walker was my um, dissertation advisor, and she, guided me through my dissertation, which is on Dudley Weldon Woodard. And then one other thing, in Beyond Banneker, I'm learning about all these Black mathematicians, and in particular, Woodard stuck out to me because Woodard is my family's name. It's my grandfather's last name. It's my mom's maiden name. So when I think about family, I think of the name Woodard. And it's just one of the reasons why he like really stuck out to me. And it just meant so much to learn about these Black mathematicians and Beyond Banneker. So that's just a little bit about me. In this presentation, I'm going to give the brief story of Dudley Weldon Woodard, who's the second African American to receive a PhD in math, and the role he played in establishing the master's program at the historically Black Howard University in Washington, D.C. And to tell this story, first I'm going to give some background on HBCUs here in the U.S. So historically Black colleges and universities graduate a disproportionate number of Black STEM PhDs who go on to graduate a disproportionate number of Black STEM PhDs. And this is usually at the undergraduate level, where many students go on to other schools, usually PWIs, to receive their advanced degrees. This is still true today. So in my dissertation, I decided to take a look at the genesis of HBCUs, and particularly the math department at Howard, to see what we can learn about this phenomenon. And Howard is one of the top HBCUs to award bachelor's degrees to Black students who then go on to receive PhDs in STEM. It's also one of the first HBCUs to offer graduate studies. And this is significant for a few reasons. Um, when HBCUs were first founded, many of them served as secondary schools, providing education for Black people in the South whose access to reading and writing was not only denied, but made illegal during slavery. So HBCUs, among other educational entities like churches and community groups, and so on, these entities stepped in to fill in the gaps, to fill in these gaps. And it would take many years for all of these colleges and universities to operate at the collegiate level only. For example, in 1915, there were 99 Black colleges and only 33 of them were offering college level courses. And then in a survey from 1917, serving the 16 Black federal land grant institutions, and the federal land grant institutions are a public, federally funded colleges and universities here in the US. Of the 16 of them that admitted Black students, only one was operating at the collegiate level. And so for the Black students at this time who were taking college courses, they enrolled in private institutions like Howard University, which I'll continue to talk about Howard throughout this presentation, but also universities like Wilberforce, which is a HBCU in Ohio that Woodard actually has connections to. And then there were some white institutions like Oberlin that would admit Black students. And then for Black students in the South who wanted to enroll in either professional or non-professional graduate programs, and who wanted to attend public institutions because those institutions were more affordable for the working class, some Southern governments, instead of integrating these public graduate programs, they provided what Sanders calls segregation scholarships towards these students attending already integrated schools in the North. And of course, this was not without complications. There was also an ongoing debate of the purpose of higher education for Black people. Should they be receiving a classical liberal arts education, or should they learn just enough to make the majority of them effective laborers and a small number of them professionals like doctors, teachers, lawyers, etc.? So it was significant that Howard, at its founding in 1867, was already talking about professional graduate degrees as well as non-professional graduate degrees. Howard was also home to many Black mathematicians who were denied employment at white institutions due to race-based discrimination. So a lot of the early Black mathematicians, and also Black people in this country who had PhDs, a lot of them at some point were at Howard University as professors. So one of those mathematicians is Woodard, who, as I said, he's the second African-American to receive a PhD in math. And he spent the second half of his career at Howard and was instrumental in starting the master's program in math, but also graduate studies in general at the university. He also taught at other HBCUs, and he received his bachelor's degree from the Wilberforce, which I mentioned before, which is an HBCU. Woodard, in starting the graduate program, was instrumental in laying the foundation for the mathematical sciences at Howard and beyond by seeding teachers, faculty, researchers, and the mathematical sciences whose contributions we still feel today. And I just wanted to do a quick note on methods. This was a historical study, and I use archival documents like, here are some examples, like census records, like newspaper articles, course catalogs from Howard. I use these archival documents to gain information about Woodard and the graduate program at Howard. Using the information that I gathered from these documents, I was able to learn a lot about Woodard's family, which just previously not much was known, or like at least the information wasn't gathered into one place. And from that, I created this family tree of Woodard and his family. And some interesting things that I discovered about Woodard's family is that there were a lot of educators in his family. Um, his his dad's second wife, his stepmom, was a longtime teacher. His wife as well was a teacher, and then Woodard's descendants, his son and grandsons, were either professors and/or scientists. Another interesting thing that I discovered was which or that I discovered was that Woodard's father, who's Dudley R. Woodard, and as you can see, there's a lot of Dudleys in this family. So Dudley R. Woodard, on a census record, it stated that he completed at least 1 year of college, which I thought was interesting. And I found this student list from Atlanta University, which is an HBCU, also an HBCU in Atlanta, or was, sorry. And there's a Dudley R. Woodard listed there from Macon, which is where his dad was born. However, there's no other identifying information like an address or anything like that. So I can't say for 100% sure that this is his dad, but it could be. And that census record definitely stated that he had had at least 1 year of college. Here is a timeline of some of the major events in Woodard's education and career, starting with the high school that he attended, which in Galveston, Texas, where he grew up. And at that time in Galveston, Texas, there were two high schools, one for the white population, one for the Black. And so Woodard attended the Central High School in Galveston. And then he also taught at HBCUs. He received his bachelor's from Wilberforce, as I mentioned before. And here's an article I found. I'm not sure if you can see, it might be a little blurry, but Woodard actually delivered the valedictorian speech at his commencement from Wilberforce University. And then after Wilberforce, Woodard went on to the University of Chicago, where he got a second bachelor's and a master's, also in math. And at the University of Chicago, a colleague and I, working on another project, discovered that Woodard was a student of some of the pioneers of topology here in the US. And that's who is here on the screen. So E.H. Moore, Oswald Veblen, and R.L. Moore were all at the University of Chicago at the same time that Woodard was there. And Woodard would later go on, when he went to do his PhD, he worked with a student of R.L. Moore as his dissertation advisor. He also worked on topology. And he brought topology with him to Howard. And then many of his students and later professors also specialized in topology. And here is Woodard's transcript from, or a page of his transcript from the University of Chicago. And I tried to make this bigger, but E.H. Moore actually recommended him for the master's degree. So after, or the first few years that Woodard was at the University of Chicago, he actually only took classes during the summer, and he would return to Galveston during the school year and teach 7th grade at his old school there, which I think is interesting. As I have looked into many of these Black mathematicians like Albert Cox as well, he was a high school teacher at some point before teaching higher education. After Woodard received his master's, he taught at Tuskegee Institute, another HBCU. Maybe you'll see the pattern here. He taught at Tuskegee and then later at Wilberforce. While he was at Tuskegee, he published both a textbook on arithmetic and a study on teaching geometry at Tuskegee. What you're seeing on the screen is an excerpt from the introduction of the arithmetic textbook, which I think gives us some idea of his teaching philosophy at the time. And in the introduction, Woodard says, the course This course centers about problems. If this book has any distinctive features, it lies in the characters of the problems. He also says that he works with every department at Tuskegee to develop the problems or to gather problems for this arithmetic textbook. And in his study for teaching geometry, he stressed the importance of collaborating with peers as well as developing and working on practical problems. So here are just two problems from the arithmetic textbook, which show or which require the students to go to other departments at Tuskegee to address these problems. Then in 1920, so after Tuskegee, after Wilberforce, Woodard joined the faculty at Howard in 1920. The same year, he was appointed to the dean of the College of Liberal Arts, and he began his work there. So as the dean, he was also made the chair of the Committee on Graduate Studies, and he began working on formulating graduate work at the university. This, I'm going to go into more detail in a second. But while he was at Howard, during the summers, he would take graduate courses at the University of Pennsylvania. And then in 1927, he took a leave of absence to complete his PhD dissertation. And then he received his PhD in 1928 from the University of Pennsylvania. And his dissertation titled On Two-Dimensional Analysis C2 with special reference to the Jordan curve. And in the introduction, he references a problem that R.L. Moore, right, one of those pioneers in topology that I mentioned before, that he had posed from a previous paper, and his dissertation added on to that problem. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a bit about graduate studies at Howard. And this here is an excerpt from the bylaws of the Board of Trustees in 1867. So Howard was founded in 1867. And in this excerpt, there's recommendations for non-professional second degrees were discussed as early as Howard's founding in 1867. In this excerpt, there are some guidelines for, they give some recommendations for the second degree. So the requirements needed to get a second degree. And this is at Howard's founding. And then here's another excerpt. So this one's from the 1904 to 1905 course catalog, where they give more recommendations or requirements for a master's degree. And these requirements will continue to evolve and be formalized up until the establishment of the graduate school at Howard, which happened in 1934. So from its founding up until 1934, there are a lot of different recommendations for a master's degree and requirements to get a master's degree. And during that time, some people got master's degrees before the graduate school was established. The Committee on Graduate Studies that I mentioned before was established in 1911. Eventually, around 1920 is when it took over formulating graduate studies at Howard. And Woodard, as the dean of the College of Liberal Arts, served as the chair of this committee. And this committee continued to work together with other professors, with the president at the time, to formalize graduate studies. Sorry, the president of Howard University, to formalize graduate studies at the university. This is when Woodard's work started at Howard. So his first year in 1920, when he first got there. And Dyson, who wrote a book about the first 100 years at Howard. In that book, he said during the 1920 to 21 school year, graduate work took on a whole new life. And then he says, Woodard, professor of math and dean of the College of Liberal Arts, was leading the spirits in these endeavors. The beginning of graduate work and course at Howard was indebted to his interests and his efforts. So Woodard was very involved with this committee in getting the ball rolling on graduate studies at Howard. Woodard also, in 1921, introduced teaching fellowships for master's students, giving not only financial support to the master's students, but also the opportunity to gain teaching experience. And then one other thing that Woodard did was he recruited Albert Cox, who we've been talking about so far in this conference, who we're celebrating the 100th year of his PhD. Woodard recruited him to Howard. So in 1929. So around the start of the master's program, you had the first and the second African-American to get a PhD in math working in on the faculty together at Howard. The requirements for the master's degree continue to change, as I said, up until the establishment of the graduate school. And there were university-wide requirements as well as some departmental requirements. So here is an excerpt from Howard's course catalog and outlining some of the requirements for a master's degree. And some of the differences at this point, so like as the school is officially established, in order to get a the requirements were so that students now had to apply to be in the master's program. Before, students were either recommended by a faculty member or a member of the graduate committee. Students were required to have a bachelor's degree from Howard or an equivalent institution. They were required to take 30 credits of coursework. The breakdown you can see in this excerpt here. And then specifically to the math department, students were required to have a reading knowledge of both French and German. So in their master's program, they had language requirements for their students. And then in addition to that, students had to complete a thesis project and a final oral exam. And I want to emphasize that the Committee on Graduate Studies was involved in every part of this process, not including the formalizing the requirements, but also they accepted the applications, they approved course plans and thesis projects, and they also administered the final exams in collaboration with the student's advisor. So one of Woodard's and Albert Cox's most promising student was mathematician William Claytor. And William became Claytor became the third African-American to earn a PhD in math. Before that, Claytor is an alum of Howard. So he went straight through. He did his undergrad at Howard. He was one of the first students in the master's program at Howard. And a student, like I said, of Woodard and Cox. And then he went on to get his PhD. This was in 1933, also in topology, also under the same advisor as Woodard at the University of Pennsylvania. While a master's student, Claytor published a solution to a limit problem in the mathematics. While a master's student, Claytor published a solution to a limit problem in the American Mathematical Monthly, which was a big deal at the time, but also I think that speaks to the guidance that he was getting from his professors like Woodard and Cox in the master's program at Howard. And then after receiving his PhD, he had high hopes of working in a research institution. He had a very promising research career ahead of him. However, as was everyone else's story at the time, because of his race, he was denied any positions at white institutions. So he spent his career too at HBCUs, starting with West Virginia State College, which is a college in West Virginia, in HBCU. And there he taught and mentored Katherine Johnson, who some people may be familiar with her, but she came to like public light after the film Hidden Figures. But she was a student of Clater, and she talked about him finally in interviews and like his support of her and becoming a research mathematician. Um, so he mentored her before her career at NASA. And then after West Virginia State College, he joined the faculty at Howard. Um, he joined the faculty the year that Woodard retired, but Albert Cox was still there. So he and Albert Cox would have been on the faculty at the same time. So Howard was ahead of his time. Howard was ahead of their time in thinking about and developing graduate programs at the time when they did. The establishment of graduate work at Howard laid a foundation for HBCUs and graduate work, specifically at HBCUs. Eventually, Howard will offer doctoral degrees. Their PhD program in math was launched in 1975. We're coming up on the 50th year anniversary of this PhD program in math. And it was developed under the direction of James Donaldson, who also a Black mathematician, a longtime faculty member at Howard. And he, in addition to his math research, he also does a lot of work on research around Black mathematicians and their journeys in HBCUs. This PhD program in math is the first PhD program in math at an HBCU. And it's no doubt that Woodard's work, along with the graduate committee and the president of the university and everyone else involved, in developing the master's program at Howard, laid the foundation for this PhD program. In addition, many students of the master's program also became professors at HBCUs, helping to strengthen the legacy of HBCUs and their important role in the education of Black students, and specifically Black students in STEM. And I believe it's beneficial to continue studying the lives and careers of early Black mathematicians to understand how they contribute to this legacy of education at HBCUs. Here are some of my references. And that's it. I added my email address there in case anyone wants to get in touch and chat more about Woodard and Howard.
Great, thank you very much, Terika.
Thank you.
So you've left some nice time for questions. Are there any questions in the audience or on Zoom? So I guess while we wait for people to conjure up some questions, so I guess the first HBCU, it wasn't Howard, right? It was it Cheney College or Lincoln?
Yeah, the first HBCU established, was Cheney College in Philadelphia.
So what was the sort of, I guess, communication between them like? I mean, I guess they were sort of independent, but did they share some sort of, did they have like visiting professors from different HBCUs or?
Yeah, sorry. That's actually, that's something I haven't thought about looking into. I'm not sure with Cheney College, but there are, like, thinking about Woodard's trajectory, he moved around from HBCUs. Like he went to Tuskegee, then Wilberforce, and then Howard, and then other professors at Howard did the same thing. Students of Woodard went to Wilberforce, so there was some sort of like connection or like pipeline happening there that I've noticed some patterns, but I haven't really investigated it. And same with West Virginia State. Both Clater and Cox taught there before coming to Howard. So yeah, there had to be some sort of like network or
Yeah.
pipeline between the HBCUs. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be interesting.
Yeah, something I'll definitely continue thinking about.
So please, anyone, if you have a question, interrupt me, but I'm happy to keep asking questions. Do you have a question? Oh.
Well, yeah, I was. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I wondered. So I from the other work I do, I know that a lot of HBCUs have been involved with quantum computing recently. Do you know anything about the contribution of mathematicians to that work?
Sorry, I didn't hear something computing.
Yeah, sorry. So I know there's a lot of work with HBCUs at the moment in quantum computing.
Okay.
And I wondered if there was anything about the mathematical kind of programs that ties in with that. I know it's kind of part maths and part physics, but is that something
Yeah.
you're aware of?
No, I'm sorry. It's not something I'm familiar with at the moment. My work mostly looks at the takes a like historical look at these HBCUs.
Okay, so maybe in the future.
Yeah, so something else to think about.
I think I know Thomas Searle, who's working on that Howard actually. So whilst we're waiting for some questions, so just I guess do you have one? Okay, we have okay, so we have one question. So are these institutions, I guess the answer is yes, but are these institutions still known as HBCUs, or have they diversified student intake? So it's
Yeah. Sorry.
no, sorry, carry on.
No worries. So most of them are the ones that I mentioned, with the exception of West Virginia State, that the demographic there has swapped. And yeah,
So what do you mean swaps? You have to explain that
like
for some of the
so
audience.
from being majority Black to majority white.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I'll also say, so like Howard University is still, as I mentioned, among the top HBCUs in many fields, but we're just talking about STEM here today. And there are others like Spelman, Morehouse. These are schools in the Atlanta university system. So not all of the HBCUs have survived, though. Some of them have closed. Um, and some of them they're still going through. I didn't get into detail about it. But there have always been like issues with funding, and with like for example, federal funding not being distributed equitably, and things like that. So they have their obstacles for sure, and some of them may have closed, since 1900, since the late 1800s. But places like Howard are still, Wilberforce, Tuskegee also are still up and running.
Cool. So we have another question. So can you comment, if you feel able to, on the future of historically Black colleges in the current social climate?
Um, Yeah, I'm gonna not comment on that because there are definitely other scholars that are working on, that sort of stuff, um that can definitely
Yes.
answer that a lot better than me. I'm trying to think of one name. I I can't think of it off of the top of my head, but I can add it to the chat once we're done with the Q&A.
Yeah, no worries. So I think going back to sort of your thesis, so I really liked. So I'm more of a scientist where sort of evidence is sort of data, numbers, equations. But I really liked your presentation because you really, I mean, you told the story through the evidence, the archival material, the new, you know, but do you find that when you're researching the history of, I guess, Black people, Black scientists, that it's harder to find evidence? So it's known, right, that sort of records of Black people are not as thorough as say white people. So
Yeah.
can you just tell me about the nature of gathering the evidence in your line of work?
Yeah, so that's definitely a true statement. And thinking about like when I was looking for information about Woodard's family, that was really difficult to do. Just following his family along in the like census records. I relied very heavily on newspaper articles. But like for example, his mom kind of disappeared from the census records, and it took me a very long time to figure out that she had gotten remarried and had a different name and to find her again. And these census records from, like late 1800s are written in hand, handwritten, written in cursive, hard to read, sometimes information is slightly off. So that was difficult. The thing about all of the documents and stuff that I found about Howard University, however, I got from Howard's archives. Um, so Howard, which if you're like interested, Digital Howard is the digital archives and it's very extensive. There's a lot of stuff there. And these records were you know, kept by Howard for their own archives. So there's a lot of information there. Um, Pretty much all of the course catalogs since, the beginning are there. So that was like unique in that Howard happened to have this um, extensive archive and that is digital. So I had access to it as well. And it's like searchable, I didn't have to look through, I could search Woodard's name in the archive and everything where his name showed up would pop up. I didn't have to read through everything to look for his name. So that definitely made it more accessible and that just speaks to Howard University and their record keeping. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, yes. Let me. So I guess, yeah, so this question is quite specific on Howard University. So does Howard University and I guess HBCUs offer scholarships to international students, for instance?
Yeah, that's also something that I'm not sure about. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine that they do, but I don't have any information on that.
I'm sure they can research it. So back to sort of so we had the, I guess, pleasure of being in contact with Albert Cox's grandson. Have you? So you showed this nice family tree, right, with many a Dudley.
Mhm.
Have you been in contact with any of Woodard's family?
Yeah,
That's
I have. He has a great granddaughter who is in New York, actually. So I was able to meet with her and um, over the phone talk to her mom about Woodard, and then this is his great granddaughter, and then she connected me with her uncle, who would be a grandson of Woodard, who definitely like knew more about him personally. And we exchanged emails about Woodard and about what he knew about the family. Um, yeah, there aren't
nice.
many um, of his family left or like in the U.S. But yeah, I am grateful that I was able to talk to his great granddaughter and grandson and granddaughter-in-law as well.
So you mentioned this this book that inspired you. I mean, book from your thesis advisor, right? Beyond Banneker. So I mean, it seems like your thesis could be well, compiled into a biography, right? Into a book, like a scientific biography. So do you have any ambitions for that direction to kind of write a book on Woodard?
Yeah, that's definitely something that's on my vision board, on my plans for my career. I'm not quite there yet. You know, I just finished in the spring, but yeah, it's definitely something I'm thinking about and I plan to do at some point. I didn't mention this, but in my dissertation, in my findings chapters, one of the findings chapters is a biography of Woodard. And then the second findings chapter, I go more into detail about the graduate program at Howard. But yeah, that's definitely something that, you know, it's on the list of career things that I like to do.
Great. So there are no more questions. Thank you very much, Terika, for this excellent talk. So yeah, let's go around the report.
Thank you.
So Terika, we do have a so yes, we're finishing a bit early, so extra 10 minutes for a break. If you wanted to hang around on the big screen, well, maybe some people want to chat with you. You also feel free to leave if you need to leave, but yeah, you can hang around if people have questions in there.
Yeah, I can hang around for a bit.
Okay, cool. Well, great. So let's thank you for the session and
See what's on the back.
oh yeah, so we are so we're back at 5 o'clock for the last talk of the day.
Hey, Terika. Can you hear me?
Hi, yes.
No, thanks so much for that talk. In my head, is there a case at the moment? Is it in North Carolina A&T and their kind of historical underfunding?
Sorry, I can't hear you with the background noise.
Sorry, don't worry. We'll give people a chance to kind of dissipate and then I'll try again.
Okay.
So I have a few friends who work at HBCUs, and I understand there was a court case. I think it was North Carolina A&T, and the kind of the funding that they got compared to Chapel Hill. I'm not sure if that was my. I don't know. Is there anything you've heard about that kind of issue going back?
Yeah, there have been North Carolina would be one of the public institutions and which are federally funded. But since their like inception, there have not been the distribution of funds from the federal government have not been equitable. And in recent years, I'm actually not familiar with North Carolina, but I know the University of Maryland. There were schools in Georgia and Florida that sued because of the lack of funding that they were getting. I could share like more. I did talk about it in my dissertation briefly, but I could share some resources if you're like interested in reading more about those court cases and what happened there.
Yeah, thanks. I'll be grateful. Thank you.
No problem.
There's also yes. Grab some merch. Yeah. Oh, you got the big. Yes. Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
I can go and find some more actually.
What's this?
It's for,
X's and screens.
Yeah.
It's gotta replace things.
That was really heavy full of stuff. Just like, so you go to listen to them, you go to the free things.
That's what it's there, so you like. Yeah, so Terika, so you're so Luke, I don't know if you can see me with the
That's cameras on there.
that one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, can you see me? Hello?
Yeah, I can see you.
Great. Yeah, no, really interesting talk. So I've been interested in the sort of scientific biography and history of mathematics. And I remember so I'm a big fan of Albert Einstein's, so reading his biographies and so on. And there was a famous photo of Einstein giving a lecture to black students, right? I don't know if you've seen this, but I can't remember if it's Howard or Lincoln University. Or, but I mean around, yeah.
I know the photo, but I'm actually not sure where it was. But let's see. I'm gonna look it up.
Because I think at that time when Woodard was sort of going
Yes,
to Howard, I
Lincoln.
mean there was a lot of activity in the US in mathematics. Actually, topology and geometry was the hot topic in that time, right? In the big university.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that I didn't know his connection with Veblen actually.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's something so me and a colleague were working on a project that stems from my dissertation, but it's basically on the Black topologists who were there at the beginning of the field, like Woodard and Clater, who worked with these, pioneers in topology like Oswald Veblen and E.H. Moore and R.L. Moore. And Albert Klein is who their advisor was at the University of Pennsylvania. So it's someone else.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Klein has fame.
Yeah.
Yeah, the black topologist. I mean, that sounds like a nice book title, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we gave a presentation on it a month or so ago at the MAA Math Fest in Sacramento. But yeah, we just kind of, went through like the history, and it was in I mean at a few different points, but like seeing Woodard's Chicago transcripts, seeing his dissertation where he addresses a question of R.L. Moore's and so on, and just seeing that like, oh, he was there at the same time. He must have worked with these people before even doing his dissertation at the University of Pennsylvania.
That's really interesting.
And-
Well, I'm gonna grab a coffee. So yeah. Oh, Terika, yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and then like a lot of students in the master's program at Howard also did dissertations in topology. So it became a big field that they were working on at Howard as well.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's yeah. It's really interesting to kind of plot this lineage of topology.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Terika. So I'm just going to grab a coffee. You are, feel free to leave. I guess you can see the room, right? So you can see what's going on.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
No worries, thank you.
Thanks, Terika.
Yeah.